learning and your local outdoor spaces. This is part of the Be Wild project funded by Heritage National Lottery. My name is Christina and I'm a tutor with the Field Studies Council based out at lovely Millport. Thankfully, we have a beautiful day for our third session. So the Field Studies Council is an environmental education charity that aims to connect everyone with the environment. So to help them appreciate its benefits, but also to help them learn how to protect it as well. This week, I've been taking you through a range of sessions to hopefully give you some inspiration for how you might use outdoor learning in your local spaces with your young people. So whether you are out in the wilderness or whether you're in the middle of a city, the outdoors is still a fantastic location to use with young people to help their learning, help their personal development and growth, help them increase their confidence, but also it's just good for a good old-fashioned fun as well. And particularly in these strange circumstances that we find ourselves in, there really is no better time to get young people outdoors and connecting with the environment. So each session will have an overall theme that will then be jam-packed full of different activity ideas, sessions that you might run, and tools and resources that you can use to facilitate the outdoor learning. But we'll also be discussing ways that you can adapt the sessions to suit different age groups or different environments. And we'll also be discussing health and safety as well. So if you've joined us for our last two sessions, we had on Monday, we had Marvellous Mammals. Yesterday, we looked at the world on our doorstep, so looking at navigation, orienteering, and sort of mini activities. Today, we are going to be looking at Minibeasts and hunting for Minibeasts and insects and invertebrates. Tomorrow, we are heading to the coast where we're looking at the rocky shore. And then on Friday, we are going to be looking at bushcraft and wilderness skills. So we've had a good couple of sessions already, and there's still plenty more to come. So how each session will work is you'll get this live introduction from me where I'll be kind of setting the scene and getting you in the right headspace for the session. I'll then be introducing the main video, which will have all the session and activity ideas. And then we'll finish off with some live question and answers. So at any point during this session, you can submit a question that I will answer live at the end of the session. And you can email that to our email address, which is questions@field-studies-council.org. And if you ever need to be reminded of that email, it's in the description to this video. But for right now, we'll get started with our third session, hunting for Minibeasts. So what we want to achieve with this session, first of all, we're going to talk about the biology of insects. What makes an insect, what characteristics they have. We'll then go on to talk about why they're important for us and some of the species that you might see in your area. And we'll then delve into a whole range of different activities you can do to hunt for Minibeasts in your local space. And the good thing is that these activities, they can be done in a built-up area or they can be done, out in a green space as well. They're very, very versatile. We'll then finish up with some different activities you can do with your young people to make your local spaces more friendly for insect life. So lots of things to get done. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll have some really good ideas. So first of all, let's have a little think about what actually makes an insect an insect. What are they? So insects are part of a group of animals called the arthropods. And arthropods are pretty much the most successful group of animals that have ever lived on the planet. So we're thinking about just insects alone. They are around over 1 million different species of insects that have been counted on this planet. And the chances are there's probably a lot more than that as well, because there's probably quite a lot that we haven't found yet or recorded yet. So over 1 million species. But also the total weight of all the insects in the world is 70 times greater than the weight of all the humans. So when you think about those two facts, it kind of, we live in an insect world. We don't live in a human world. They're an incredibly important group of animals for us to look at, particularly with young people. So the general body plan that they have, there's a few characteristics that make an insect an insect. The first one is that they have 6 legs. So there's other Minibeasts that we know of, like spiders, millipedes and centipedes that don't have 6 legs. So they are not an insect. They're related to insects, but they're not quite an insect. An insect has to have 6 legs. They also have a segmented body, so different sections that join together to make up their body. And they have jointed appendages, so clear joints along their legs and arms and appendages. And they also have an external skeleton called an exoskeleton, which means their skeleton is essentially on the outside of their body, and they regularly molt that throughout their life. So they're a really important component of our ecosystem. Insects, we would live on an entirely different planet if we didn't have insects. And one of the biggest contributions that they make to our lives is that they provide us with ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are naturally occurring processes that occur on a day-to-day basis that benefit us. And there's lots of different ones insects do. Two of the key ones, the first one is pollination. So essentially allowing plants to reproduce and spreading them across the country. So particularly that's important for our crops. Everything we eat is spread by insects. And then the other one that's particularly important is decomposition. So many insects act to naturally break down materials, and that adds the nutrients back to the ecosystem, back to the soil, which then again in turn has a massive benefit for us. So they're an incredibly varied group of animals. They have a huge range of really cool and interesting adaptations to help them survive, and many of them are also absolutely beautiful as well, as you'll hopefully see from this video. So they're a group of animals that don't get a lot of love, I think, across particularly the UK. But they're so important, and I think they're a really interesting group of animals to look at with young people, not only because you can find them literally anywhere, even inside your own home sometimes, but also they are a group of animals that are seriously in decline because of human impacts. So they're being very heavily impacted by climate change, they're being very heavily impacted by habitat loss. So they're a really useful group of animals to engage young people with and get them learning about. So in a moment, we're going to go through all these different activities you can use with young people that are cost effective, engaging, straightforward. So we'll go through those in just a moment. But first of all, we've got our quiz for this section. So if you've watched any of the other two sessions, you'll know that I quite like a quiz. This is just to get our session a bit more interactive and get you thinking in the right headspace for our session topic. So this quiz is called Who Am I? In a moment, I'm going to be showing you a series of pictures of different mini beasts. And you've got to tell me whether you think it's an insect or not. So if you were paying attention before to the different characteristics that make insects, you'll hopefully be able to be an expert at this. But I'll show the picture for about 10 seconds and then I'll reveal the answer. Okay, if you're in a group, you can do it all together. If you're just by yourself, you can just keep a little mental tally. So here we have our first one. Whoops, insect or not. All right, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so this is an insect. This is a type of beetle, and beetles are actually the most diverse group of insects we have, as you'll see later on. Next, we have this little guy. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So this is not an insect. This is a centipede, so it is part of the arthropods, but it's a myriapod. So it's related to insects, but of course it doesn't have those 6 legs, so it is not an insect. Next, everyone's favourite, lovely little ladybird. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Hopefully we all managed to get that. We do have an insect. So a ladybird is an insect. It's got those 6 legs. Next. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So a fly is an insect. Got 6 legs. Got all those segmented body parts. Is an insect. Next. Ooh, hopefully nobody's squeamish. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Our spider, not an insect, is an arachnid. Related, but it's got 8 legs. Next, we have little woodlouse or slather. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So woodlouse is not an insect, and woodlouse has more than 6 legs. It is actually a crustacean, believe it or not. That may have been a trick one there. And then finally, we have lovely butterfly. I'm going to put it so you don't see it shining through. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So yes, a butterfly, excuse me, is an insect. Okay, so hopefully we got on with that okay. I will now introduce our main session. So in a moment, the video will start playing. This is hunting for mini beasts. So the video will last for about 25 minutes or so long. You'll then be brought back to me live and where I'll be answering some of your questions. So at any point during the video, you can submit those questions to the email address questions@field-studies-council.org. But we really hope you enjoy. Here comes the video. Thank you very much.
Insects and other mini beasts have adapted to live in all sorts of environments around the UK, including built up in urban environments, so there's potential to develop sessions and activities around that topic wherever you are. Understanding more about the basic biology of insects gives young people a really good insight into actually how important insects are for the worldwide economy. So ecosystem services are natural benefits that we gain from nature, so processes that go on, like pollination and decomposition, of which insects are really, really crucial for. The WWF Living Planet Index estimates ecosystem services to be worth a whopping $125 trillion. Our world would be a very different place without insects. So it's incredibly important for young people to learn about them and appreciate them, and also they're accessible to all. First, we're going to look at a range of different ways where you can kind of capture insects, so look at them a little bit more closely and ID them. Don't worry, you don't have to be an expert in insects to be able to run an outdoor session that's focusing on insects, because it's up to the students themselves, and it gives them a way to be in charge of their own learning. So if someone comes up to me and asks, oh, what's this species? I don't tell them the answer. I always kind of try and say to them, let's find out together. And it makes them in charge of their own learning, and it adds a lot more value to their experience. There are a whole range of ID guides that FSC has published that you can purchase online about insects. Some of them are, related to a particular group of insects like butterflies or ladybirds, but some of them are then more geared towards a particular habitat, so like a grassland or something like that. So feel free to look at them online. There's loads of information there out there about insects in the UK. And the beauty about finding insects in the UK is that they are literally everywhere. You can find them on the sides of buildings, in the corners of rooms. You can find them underneath slabs, underneath rocks, in amongst dead leaves, grassland. There really is no limit to where you can find them and where you can develop sessions around them. So because of the fact that you might investigate insects, in any location, your kind of group management style will be directly related to the habitat that you're in. So you have to consider the hazards that are in your area. So when you've chosen a location that you potentially want to use for, insect outdoor learning, just think about what hazards are in the area. Are you close to a road? Do you have uneven surfaces? Things like that. And then adapt your group management style to to reduce the risks of those hazards and set clear boundaries again to just reduce the risk of those hazards having an impact on your session. There's a huge variety of different bits of equipment that you can use to make a bug hunt engaging for young students and older students as well, and most of them are either really, really cheap or you can even make them yourself. So the first bit of kit we're going to look at are called putters, and this is an example of one here. So they're nice and simple, they can be bought cheaply or they can be made yourself. So they're comprised of a nice clear see-through pot with a lid on the top, The lid has two holes punched into it that has two flexible tubes coming out of each hole. One of these tubes has on the end or in the middle some kind of mesh or some kind of filter over the top of it. So in this case it's the green one, and then the other tube has nothing, it's just a clear tube. The one that has the filter on it, that goes into your mouth. The second tube goes down onto one of the little insects or mini beasts that you are wanting to sample. So you move around an environment with these putters looking for an animal. Once you've found one that's the right size, you pop the tube down onto the animal, and then once it's at the right orientation to not hurt it, you suck it up and it goes down the tube and into your pot. So these add a little bit of excitement to a bug hunt and make it super engaging, particularly for young students, but also teenagers as well. Love to use these, and you get they allow you to kind of get into nooks and crannies to capture insects that you might not be able to if you were using something like a net. You can make them yourself, just make sure you apply some form of filter to the bottom of your tube that goes into your mouth, just to avoid any accidental ingestion of insects. But you can buy them online. You can get like a pack of 5 for around about a tenner from quite a lot of online retailers. But they're really useful and really handy little tools to use for a bug hunt. So we'll have a little go and see what we get. Next on the list we have sweep nets and beating sheets. So beating sheets in particular, you can just make them yourself out of any old white sheet that you have. Some of ours are old shower curtains or bed sheets or anything at all. The white colour is really helpful because it just means when you capture your insects, you can see them nice and clearly. Sweep nets come in a huge variety of shapes and sizes, and they tend to have fairly heavy rims and quite big sort of nets to them, just to be able to capture lots of insects. The heavy rim is to kind of help knock vegetation and knock the animals from the vegetation into the net. You could potentially make these yourselves, but they can be purchased online from about 20 quid from various websites. So beating sheets are a group activity, and you'll need at least 2 or 3 people to use them. How it works is one person on one end of the sheet and one person on the other end of the sheet holds it nice and taut. This then gets laid flat and pulled along to, or moved along to, the side of tall vegetation or underneath a tree, something like that. So that's hold nice and taut. A third person then takes that vegetation and either beats it lightly against the sheet or shakes it gently to dislodge the organisms, and so they fall out of the vegetation and fall onto the sheet. You can then skip them up in pots, or you can double up and use your putters to collect them once they're on the sheet before they fly away. As I said before, our sweep nets, the best thing to do with them is run them along the top of tall vegetation, using that heavy frame to gently knock any organisms that might be on the plant into the bottom of your net, and then you can investigate. So one of the common species that you might see around tall vegetation, and one that I've managed to get in my sweep net there, is something called a frog hopper. There's lots of different species of frog hoppers, and you don't need to worry about the details of one species from another, because sometimes it involves counting the hairs on their back left leg kind of level of detail. But frog hoppers are a really common species around grassland, and they're also quite common to see the things they produce. So they're called frog hoppers because they can jump really far. They can jump to 70 centimetres, which is actually, in relation to body size, it's more than a flea. But they produce this thing called cuckoo spit. And cuckoo spit is this kind of froth that you see, white froth almost, that kind of you see on tall vegetation and plants really commonly at this time of year in the summertime. So frog hoppers create that froth for their larvae, and the larvae are found inside the froth, and it helps prevent them being eaten by predators. And it also helps prevent them from drying out as well, interrupted by the animals we're talking about. So the way to identify frog hoppers is by looking at their wings and the way they hold them. So they kind of almost hold them like a little tent. It's kind of in a triangle structure, and they vary in colour. Normally they're kind of dark brown, but you might find them black, grey as well. So the next thing we're going to discuss is pitfall traps. So these are things you can leave overnight to sample for insects in your local area and then check again the next morning. You can also leave them for longer than a night, and you can do them again and again and again and in different locations to kind of make comparisons about what insects you're getting and where, and where they maybe prefer, how much more insects you're getting in one location than another. So they're really simple to make. All you really need is some form of pot, and you need a trowel. So what you do, in an area of soft ground, dig a hole that's deep enough to put in your pot. Once you've got the hole, you can insert the pot into the hole. You can then fill in the gaps between the edges, because you want to make sure that your pot is completely flush with the surrounding ground, with this, and the top is level, and that there's no gaps in between where insects might kind of fall down into. So once you've dug that in perfectly, you can include a sort of filter or like a mesh over the top, depending on the size of your pot, and that's just to ensure that no small mammals fall down into it and get stuck. So you can pop that mesh over the top, and then you can use sticks to kind of hold it in place. And then finally, again, depending on where you're setting your pitfall trap, you might want to include a little lid to prevent any rainwater getting into it, and you can prop that lid up with a few small stones. And this is a really good technique to target insects that live on the ground. So for the sweep nets and our beating sheets, they've really been looking at organisms that live in vegetation, whereas these really target organisms that crawl along at the bottom of woodland and parks. So one of the types of organisms that you might find using pitfall traps that are common insects that live along the ground are beetles. So we found one type of beetle, a ground beetle, from our pitfall trap, which is really cool. So beetles are all carnivores, and they're also the largest group of insects. So there are more species of beetle than there are species of any other type of insect. So we know it's a ground beetle because of its size, its dark black colour. Ground beetles often have sort of a metallic-y sheen to their exoskeleton. And they do predominantly feed on ground level, and they'll take items of prey from there. Occasionally though, they are known to climb up different bits of vegetation to catch things like aphids and caterpillars, but they're definitely a common sight to see, so make sure to check out any under stones, under logs and things like that in your local area for them you might find. So the final technique we're going to look at for capturing insects is moth trapping. Now, a lot of people hear the word moth and immediately kind of turn their nose up or, get itchy or things like that. But moths are one of the most underappreciated groups of insects we have in the UK, and they're often just as beautiful as their butterfly cousins. So they're incredibly important not only as a base of a food web and for feeding lots of predators that we have in the UK, they're also really important pollinators, just in the same way as bees and butterflies. They're also really sensitive to temperature changes, so in the face of climate change, they're going to be really heavily impacted. So doing little investigations to learn a bit more about them is really useful for young people. So there are a variety of ways that you can go about trapping moths. Some are very, very expensive, some are completely homemade, and some fall somewhere in the middle. So for a traditional moth trap, all they really comprise of is some form of box, although buckets will work well as well. Fill them with egg crates, because old egg crates provide loads of different orientations and kind of, spaces for moths to get into once they're trapped in the trap itself. You then need some sort of sheet to allow the moths to kind of slide into the trap, and some form of light. normally battery operated. So sometimes with a little bit of investment you can get bits and pieces and make your own moth trap like that. However, there is a much easier way of doing it that will also get you really good results. Most moths are night flying and tend to be attracted to bright lights, so our homemade moth trap involves some form of bright light and a white sheet. That is literally all you need. So you can take some form of white sheet, you can use your beating sheet that you might have used for other insects, or you can use a bed sheet, and you hang it up ideally on a washing line or some sort of high place. You then pop a torch over the front of it, put the torch on around about dusk time or once it's getting a little bit dark, and just sit back and watch, and any night flying moths and other insects as well will be attracted to the light and land on your sheet. You can then go about looking at them and potting them up if you're quick enough. So we set our moth trap last night and we got incredibly lucky to get one of these moths that you do get really commonly all across Scotland in gardens and parks. So this is a beautiful elephant hawk moth. So as I said before, moths really can be just as beautiful as their butterfly cousins. So one of the main differences between moths and butterflies, if you look closely at the antennae, so butterfly antennae have a really distinct club on the end, while moth antennae tend to be a lot more feathery. And that's because moths, when they're night flying, they rely mostly on a chemical called pheromones to communicate with one another. They use it for mating, and they use it for sort of finding prey and sensing their environment as well. And the more feathery their antennae are, the more surface area they are, so the more chemicals that they can pick up in the air. But as I said, can't emphasise enough just how lovely they are. So this is him or her trying to warm himself up at the moment by beating those feathers back and forth. So wings. So he'll warm himself up and then eventually fly off. So pretty. All of these activities are really, really beneficial for young children to be able to recognise the difference between different species and learn a bit more about the biology of insects themselves. But also some of the more elaborate species like our elephant hawk moth and other butterflies can turn into art projects in themselves. You know, we in Scotland are often looking for ways to maybe bring outdoor learning into the inside when the weather isn't quite the way we want it to be. So generating kind of art projects from colourful and elaborate species like this can be a really useful way to bring the outdoors in. For older students, they can easily kind of develop key scientific investigative skills using these insects. So they could maybe try and look at generating projects around pitfall traps. What different ways of building a pitfall trap might, get more species? Is there any difference between the species that they might find in an open grassland or in a woodland? So as well as being kind of interesting and engaging and helping them learn about species, it's again kind of ticking boxes for the curriculum for excellence and helping them develop life skills as well. Older students could also kind of consider how to make their investigation more valid, and they can even take results and try drawing graphs with them if you really want to target some numeracy skills. In terms of health and safety when working around insects, there are a few things to consider. There aren't any deadly insects that will bite or sting you around the UK, however, there are some that will give you a nasty bite or a nasty sting. So it's really important to be aware of the medical conditions of your young people before maybe interacting with insects, because particularly for students that might have an EpiPen or have quite serious reactions to stings, it's really important to be aware of that so that if anything does happen, you can immediately phone for emergency services. For the vast majority of people that won't be the case though, but things like bees and wasp stings can be relatively common, particularly for things like wasps at the end of the summer when they're becoming a little bit agitated. If someone does get stung, the really important thing is to first of all just to give it a quick check and make sure the sting hasn't remained in the skin, remove it if it has, and then after that just apply a cold compress to reduce the swelling for about 10 minutes or so. In terms of bites, there are plenty of insects that will give you itchy and irritable bites, such as our midges and clegs and horseflies. But the key thing to think about when it comes to insect bites are ticks. Ticks are a really, really common species around the whole of the UK, and they live predominantly in tall grass and tall vegetation. Now, the bites themselves aren't the thing to worry about, but what they can cause is Lyme disease. So they're carriers of Lyme disease, and if you are bitten by a tick that has Lyme disease, there's a potential for infection for you. So the key thing to try and avoid tick bites in the first place is, if you know you're going to be in tall vegetation, is to make sure to wear long trousers, long socks, and just cover any bare skin. And then at the end of an activity, just make sure to check over your legs and make sure the students check themselves over to ensure that they don't have any ticks. If they do find themselves with a tick, don't just yank it out with your hand or try and scratch it out, because it'll leave behind the mouth parts. The best thing to do is either use a tick remover or use kind of fine tweezers and just pull it directly out. Lyme disease is more common in other areas of the country than it is in others, so just check if your area is particularly prevalent for Lyme disease. But the thing to watch for, if someone has got a tick and they have been bitten, the thing to look for to indicate Lyme disease is there will be bright red rings forming around the bite. Sometimes it's even referred to as like a bullseye sort of pattern. If you see those rings develop, and it can be a couple of weeks after the bite itself, then you need to seek immediate medical advice. But moving on to more pleasant topics, now we're going to look at all the different ways that you can potentially make your local spaces more friendly for insects.
That'll be good.
While many UK species of insects have adapted to live on man-made surfaces, the vast majority still need some form of green space to survive, particularly our pollinators like butterflies, moths and bees. Bees in particular are known to be in steady decline in the UK. In fact, about a third of all British bees are thought to be in decline, and many are thought to be at risk of extinction, which would have a devastating impact on plants, trees and crops. Saying no to the mow and allowing areas of green space in your local area to grow wild can have an almost immediate effect on insects. As soon as you stop mowing, slowly over the next few days and weeks, you'll see a burst of wildflowers emerging. You'll get daisies and buttercups and violets and all sorts of things. You'll be amazed how much can appear, and almost immediately you will also then start to see an increase in the visitors that you have to your garden of pollinators. You'll have more hoverflies, bees and butterflies will immediately start to come to your area and use those new flowers. Even if you don't have any green space to let grow wild at all, even potted plants and flowers can still be a really great addition to a fully tarmacked area. Creating a wildlife garden, having a project like that, it would be a hugely beneficial activity for young and old students. It allows them to develop so many physical skills and kind of planning skills, in terms of where they want to have certain elements in their garden, and it also just allows them to have, leave a long-lasting impact. There's a huge range of other things you can do, and there's loads of mini sort of micro habitats that you can build to encourage wildlife, or insects in particular, to your area. You can make bug hotels, you can make butterfly feeders, or you can even make mini ponds. Bug hotels can come in all shapes and sizes, but generally speaking consist of kind of a wooden box with different compartments filled in, and those compartments can then be filled with some form of natural material. So it might be pebbles and stones, or dried leaves, or old sticks, anything at all. And then when they're left in a habitat, slowly over time insects will begin to establish themselves. So creating these is a fantastic activity to do for young and old students. Older students can really kind of start from scratch and use woodwork skills and build it up in exactly the positions and size they want and the design they want. But young students can focus really on the design side of things. They can paint it and they can think about what animals can live there. One thing that can also be really beneficial to include in your bug hotel is some form of wood block with holes drilled in. And these make a really good home for solitary bees. So not all of the bees that live in the UK are social. A lot of them do live by themselves as well, hence the name solitary bees. And they dig themselves little nests, little burrows, and then they live in them and then fill them up when they've got young. So by drilling these holes into some form of wood, you are already creating that habitat available to them, and you'll often see these solitary bees going in and out if you put that sort of structure into your bug hotel. Another type of habitat that you might want to create for insects and for other wildlife as well is a mini pond. Now, these do not have to be large and complex to be effective. A lot of the time, simply a basin of water left outside over a period of time will function as a really successful little pond. So you can add things like gravel to them and add plants around the edge, and normally the best thing to do is fill them up naturally with rainwater, or maybe fill them up from a local freshwater source that you have close to you. You can fill them with water from the tap with a hose, but it won't quite have the same kind of natural mineral contents and materials that normal water would have, so it'll just take longer to establish. But many insects start off life as larvae living in freshwater environments, and many, like damselflies and dragonflies, are attracted to freshwater areas, so it can be a really good way to generate insect activity in your local space. If you do have the space, you can go ahead and build a wildlife pond just by yourself. All you really need is some soft ground, dig out a hole. You can then line the pond with pond liner that you can buy online, again, it's relatively inexpensive. You can then fill the bottom of it with sand, gravel, maybe a little bit of soil, and plant some flowers around the outside. Things like iris and marigold are really good for around the outside of the pond. And again, left to its own devices, over time that pond will gradually become really, really well established and be a really hotspot for insects. And when you get a hotspot for insects, you do also attract other species as well, and you might end up finding things like newts and frogs in your pond as well. The important thing to do if you do want to build yourself a pond is try and leave a shallow area of the pond, almost like a beach in one section, and that allows birds to come in and bathe. But also the other thing to make sure you're including is almost sort of ladders, from within the pond. So maybe large sticks that kind of start in the middle of the pond and then go off to dry land, and that'll mean any small mammals like hedgehogs or mice, if they accidentally fall into the pond, they can manage to get themselves out again. So the last thing you can do that we can suggest is not so much a habitat, but more of an insect feeder. So this is a butterfly feeder, and you can make these completely by yourself. So all you need is some form of jar, and you need to make up a sort of sugar solution, just with water and sugar, and you need some form of string as well. So how it works, you make up your sugar solution with 9 parts water, 1 part sugar, and you can make it really in any quantity you like. It just depends on the size of your jar, really. The easiest thing to do is make it with hot water to start off with so that the sugar all dissolves, and then once it's cooled down you can then add it to your jar. So you take your jar, in the top of the hole, in the top of the lid, sorry, you make a hole, and then you fill that hole with a bit of sponge, okay? You then add your string, because these hang upside down like this, okay? And as you can see, that sponge will become soaked with the sugar solution. So that hangs up, and then visiting butterflies can come along and take the food of the sugar solution there. Now the best part with butterfly feeders like this is that you're going to attract a lot more butterflies if you decorate it and make it look like a flower. So you can make them nice and colourful, add all sorts of colours and patterns, so particularly for young students it's a really, really nice one. So there we have it, a whole range of different ways to kind of capture and look at insects in your local space, but also a range of ways to help them as well and make your local area more insect friendly. So we've talked about a few ways to differentiate between different ages of students, and there's some really key ones in there. Just the whole principle of being able to identify and appreciate and learn about these species is, I think, a really good thing for old and young students as well. But there's lots of different ways you can take it. You know, for arts projects, you can really focus on with young or old students as well, and they can develop artistic skills by drawing and painting the species that they've seen. And for older students, really those key kind of scientific investigation skills can be really beneficial, so they can compare different areas and different abundances of insects. They can even do little mini projects and see, you know, what impact is climate change going to have on some of these insects that we've discovered. And then when we're thinking about the practical side of things, how to make your space more insect friendly, well, that is applicable to all students and all ages. They all get something out of it. You know, again, the younger students can have a go at kind of getting creative and planning the designs, and the older students can maybe do a bit more of the labour, if you like. But again, in terms of their planning and kind of landscape design and just woodwork skills as well for making a bug hotel, all of these skills are not only enjoyable in the outdoors, they're also kind of enriching the lives of the young people as well.
Okay, so there we have it. Even more straightforward and engaging activities that you can do in the outdoors with your young people, this time to look for mini beasts. Apologies for the slight technical difficulties we had during that video there. I think our internet is just a little bit high up and down there. But hopefully you all managed to keep track okay. So in a moment, I'll be answering some of your questions live. If you still want to send some in, you can still do so. Just put them into the email address, questions@field-studies-council.org, and I'll be happy to answer them. But first of all, let's look at some of the resources that you might be able to access online or take to your service that you can use to facilitate outdoor learning for mini beasts with young people. So one of the first ways that you can go to help you kind of get some information about mini beasts outdoors is by using those FSC guides that we mentioned in the video. So the whole range of different guides that FSC has produced to help you identify insects in the outdoors. You know, there's a huge range of different species that we have of insects, and you know, we're not expecting anyone to be experts. I myself still have no idea what a lot of the species of insects that we see on a day-to-day basis are, but that's where these guides come in really handy. They're absolutely beautiful. You know, they've got some lovely illustrations, and they can be used by young students and by older students and by adults as well. And they cover a whole range of different environments. So you might get a guide that says, you know, bugs on bushes. You might get one that's for ground living species, but also you get guides for particular types of insects as well. So you have guides, you know, for your bees. You have guides for your butterflies. So if you are really interested in getting out and doing mini bees hunting with your young people, these guides can be really, really helpful. As well as this, there's loads of online schemes that you can get involved with that are really good for this type of kind of activity, and many citizen science projects to get involved with. So citizen science was set up in the 1990s, or it came up with the idea in the 1990s, and it's basically a way for non-scientists, non-professionals to get involved with scientific research. So it involves, you know, people going out in their day-to-day lives, doing stuff that they would normally do, but gathering data about different components of the natural world and then contributing that to larger scale projects. So there's a huge variety of different ones out there that, you know, kind of target different areas, but there's loads for mini beasts and for insects. And one of the ones that we particularly recommend is called OPAL, or Open Air Laboratories. So this is a scheme that was set up to literally to get young people involved in the outdoors and get them learning about it. And they've set up a range of different surveys that you can download the resources from on their website that go for different areas of outdoor learning. So there is one that is for mini beast hunting, there's one that looks at pollination and pollinators, there's one that looks at air quality surveys, there's one that looks at fresh water, and there's a whole range of different surveys that young people can use and go out and collect data for outside. And they're all good fun. You know, it's not just like, you know, crunching numbers in a spreadsheet. It's all good fun where they're actively looking for, you know, things in the natural world. They then take that data and they upload it to the website. So that is going into the bigger picture. But the best part is they can actually see their data on a map. So once they've uploaded their data, it goes onto a map of the UK, so they can log on and they can see literally the data they've collected in their space, and they can see it as part of a bigger picture. And that's one of the biggest benefits, I think, to doing citizen science with young people, is that kind of they see the importance of what they're doing and they know they're part of a bigger picture and working towards something good. And the great thing with citizen science is that data is useful. It goes into forming conservation, it goes into making policy changes. So it's a really, really good thing to get get involved with your young people. And there's a range of different apps that you can download as well. So some of the other ones that we recommend for citizen science, the first one is iRecord. Now that's one that's particularly good for older students, where they can go around and they can identify different things that they see in the outdoors and upload those sightings to iRecord. But the other one that's also really good, and this is good for all ages, is iNaturalist. So this is an app that people can download onto their phones, and they can go about in their day-to-day lives, and if they see something interesting, they take a picture of it, and they don't have to know what it is, because iNaturalist will use a database to give you a suggestion for what that species is. And it's pretty accurate a lot of the time. So it's really good for people not only to learn about what they're seeing in their day-to-day lives, it also then contributes to that bigger picture citizen science scheme as well. So those links will be on the Padlet website, where you can get more information and get involved with those as well. But I think for now, we'll take some questions. So Lorraine, if you'd like to give me some questions, please.
So our first one is, are there any particular plants that are good for insects such as pollinators?
Okay, so if you heard that, if you didn't hear that question, that was, are there any particular types of plants that are good to put into your local space, for pollinators? Now there's such a big range of different plants that can be beneficial for pollinators. Flowers are of course the best thing for pollinators, but other plants that maybe have seeds and nuts or berries are particularly good for other species. In terms of for pollinators, the thing you really want to try and make sure when you're adding flowers to your area is that they're native species. Now, there are a lot of non-native plants that are, commonly in gardens and things, and a lot of them can be good for insects as well. But the native ones that have, been there for the entirety of pollinator evolution, those are definitely the best ones. And some examples of those that are nice and easy to plant could be things like cornflowers or poppies, and marigolds in particular as well. Some of the ones that will naturally occur if you leave your area to unmowed and you leave it wild, things like oxeye daisies and knapweed and ragwort as well, they will occur naturally. You can plant them yourself if you like, but if you leave that area unmowed, they will naturally occur as well. And all of them are fantastic for pollinators. Cool, next question. Have the next one.
How would you manage health and safety during woodwork sessions, for such as making bug hotels?
Okay. So that question there was, how would you manage health and safety if you were wanting to do woodwork tasks for building things like bug hotels? Now, this is obviously a really important thing to think of for health and safety, because if you're doing any kind of woodwork, you will have some form of tools. So you might have saws, you might have hammers, and it's completely down to you as to what you would like to use. We at our centre for doing bug hotels and bat boxes and things, we have saws, we have hammers, and we have nails. So those are the kind of the three big things that we do let young people use. We have primary school students using them, but we have strict kind of health and safety regulations that we follow. So these are ours. You might want to do something different, but this is what we kind of recommend. So in terms of using tools, we split young people up into groups. So one group of maybe say 4 or 5 students will make one item, one bug hotel, and there's always one adult supervisor that's attributed and set with them to keep an eye on them at the whole time. So they're never left alone with a saw or a hammer or nails at any particular point. In terms of saw use, we make sure that all our young people wear gloves. So the student that is doing the sawing, the hand that is on the saw, they don't wear a glove because that means it's more secure for their holding. But they wear a glove on their other hand, and that's just to protect their skin. And then any young people that are helping, so if they're maybe holding something down or kind of holding the table steady so that it doesn't rock while they're sawing, they also have to be wearing gloves as well. Now, in terms of rules where they get the saws and things, they only have one saw per group. If it's not being used, it is in a safe sheath and it's put away. They only have the saw when they're actively using it. But gloves and things like that is absolutely essential for protecting the skin. In terms of hammers, we don't use gloves because they just, when they have it on a glove and when they hold the hammer, things are a little bit unsteady, and a glove's not really going to help very much for a hammer. So everything is just done very carefully, very slowly. If anyone is helping at all, we don't have anyone sort of holding the nail when the young person's doing the hammering. They do that for themselves. But a good, clear demonstration before each task is really important as well. So making sure you're doing that. And then in terms of nails, we count them out and count them back in again, and they're given a certain number. They're not given any excess. And then, of course, everything is collected in again at the end. We'll often use glasses as well, safety goggles, to make sure no sawdust gets around, and we'll have a nice open space. But there's lots of little things you consider. I think the key things to bear in mind is make sure you've got enough adult or kind of responsible supervisors that can keep an eye on tool use, and make sure you've got protective equipment in mind, so things like gloves and eye masks. And also just making sure that young people's access to the tools is limited. So they only have access to the tools when they're using them. When they are not using them, they are put away and stored somewhere safely, I would say, are the key things. Okay, we have time for another.
If some learners don't like the idea of working with Minibeast, what are your top tips to help them overcome their fears?
Cool, so that's a really good question. I think that one, if you didn't hear that, that question is, if your young people are really not too keen on Minibeasts, what are your top tips for maybe, you know, getting them over their fears and actually getting them interested in Minibeasts and insects? And this is a tricky one, and it's definitely going to be slightly different depending on, you know, the individual that you're working with or the people that you're working with. I think the first thing I would say is start off small and slowly work things up. You know, so start off maybe first of all just in the classroom or indoors. Start first of all, focus on one particular group of organisms or one particular species, and start off really learning about it and getting to grips with it. And often maybe, you know, choose a species that is maybe not one that's classically scary to people. So maybe don't start off with spiders, maybe start off with something like ladybirds or butterflies that, you know, people are a little bit more relaxed around. So, you know, start off indoors. Start off, first of all, by developing a project, looking at, you know, how that species survives. Does it have any cool adaptations that help it survive? You know, why is it important for the bigger picture? Why do we have insects in the first place? And then once you've maybe set the scene a little bit more, you can then go out and, you know, look at them firsthand. You know, you can look at them in pots, you can keep a good distance from them. But really what I would say is start small and work your way up. And personally, what really got me interested in insects, and I really wasn't particularly interested in insects from the beginning, was the moth trapping. So particularly during the summertime where there's loads of different species of moth flying around, they're absolutely incredible in their adaptations and how they survive. Some of them are absolutely beautiful, like we saw with our elephant hawk moth, but many of them have so many interesting adaptations for camouflage. So there's one particular species called the buff tip moth that looks just like a little twig of silver birch tree. You would not know the difference. So moths are what really got me interested. By looking at them and by appreciating that a little bit more, that then got me into other insects as well. But yeah, overall theme, I would say start small and work your way up, and start indoors if you really need to, and learn about them first and then see them. Okay, do we have time for one more?
The last question, will be, what ethical considerations should I consider when working with Minibeasts?
Cool, so just to repeat that, what ethical considerations should we think about when it comes to working with Minibeasts? That's like another really good question. I think it kind of relates almost right back to what we said with our mammals, in that everything we should be doing when we're working with these insects is to make sure that we are, you know, doing as little damage or disturbance to them as possible. So the same sort of principles apply. If you are, you know, looking at an insect, if you've got it in a pot, or if you're looking at it closely, to have it in that pot for as short a time as possible, to make sure you're releasing it again as close to where you found it as possible. Now, in terms of handling and things with insects, you know, of course, as we said with our mammals, we don't handle the mammals at all because it's too much disturbance. And in terms of handling insects, it's again related to your students. You know, if they're older and a bit more responsible, you know, they might want to have something on their finger. A lot of the time, contact and touching, using that sense can be a fantastic way to connect people with the outdoors. But of course, that comes with a pinch of salt, because you need to trust your students that they're going to be careful. So for things like moths and butterflies, you really need to be careful not to touch their wings, because any touch kind of makes their scales fall away, damages their skin, damages their exoskeleton, and that can really hurt them. So with any insect, if you're ever wanting to handle them, you kind of need to let them come to you. You know, don't grab them, don't poke them, don't prod them. Just kind of let them, you know, come onto your finger if they like, and then leave your finger as they like as well. But absolutely, the ethical considerations need to think about what is going to do the least amount of disturbance to these animals, because, as we've already said, they're incredibly important, and we need to look after them. Fantastic. Okay, I think that's probably us out of time for questions just now. But now we'll come to your homework task for this session. So if you joined us for our previous two sessions, you'll know that I'll be setting homework tasks for each session. And this is just our way of looking to get you guys involved in some of the activities and ideas that we've kind of given you. So this activity, this session, we would like you to make something for your local space with your young people that will benefit insect life. So it can be something that we talked about in these videos. You know, it could be a mini pond, it could be a butterfly feeder, it could be a bug hotel, or it could be something else completely different. You know, it could be just planting plants around your area. But we'd like you to do something to benefit your local space for insect life. And you can upload your progress of your homework to our Padlet website. That Padlet website, the link is in the description to this video. So you can upload your progress there, but you can also access loads of the resources that we've talked about in these sessions and access them from the Padlet there. So make sure, if you haven't checked that out yet, make sure to give that a wee look. But I think that is us pretty much finished for today. So thank you very much. Really, really hope you've enjoyed. I hope particularly if we have any insects, maybe people who aren't too keen on insects, I hope we have changed your mind and that you would like to do some sessions with them in the outdoors. I will see you at the same time tomorrow, 10:30, for our 4th session, which is the Rocky Shore. We'll be travelling down to the coast and looking at activities around there. But from us today at FSC Millport, thank you very much. We will see you tomorrow. Thank you.